Before we move on, I'd like to just talk about Stan Kenton for a minute. I guess you knew him pretty well, huh? Did you?
Yeah, he and Woody were true heroes of mine, and we don't have many these days, so
Yeah.
I like to keep it that way. Stan, Woody, they were very different. The only thing about them that I would say is similar is that they were always forward-looking leaders. They didn't just play the hits. They had to play the hits of their past, when we were touring the country in ballrooms, but they were always looking forward. It's just that Woody was very visceral. He didn't talk much. But as you could tell through the years, right until he died and even afterwards, they carry on. His band was always playing new stuff. Of course, Stan made a fetish of that, in a much more grandiose case. But that I admire them, because I don't think any so-called golden era band leaders were that way. Artie Shaw tried and actually quit finally because they wouldn't let him stop playing Begin to Begin, But Stan was, he was a bigger-than-life person, and he was a great band leader. He really was. There's no doubt about it. And neither one of them ever told me or even suggested how I should play jazz. And I found out later when I got off the road that ain't the way it is. They tell you how to play. Even today in clubs.
I never met him, but he looked like he had a really unusual combination of talents in that he could handle all the details of running a band and keeping the business part of it going, which had to be just an awesome thing. And then having a great musical head and being able to spot players like you, up-and-coming guys, and give them a shot.
Yeah, he was that way.
And he seemed, the films I've seen, he looked like a very inspiring conductor, which is, there's not that many really, really fine big band conductors that make the band get off the ground every time they play. He looked like he was
and he was
guys.
that way. He was an inspiring person. And he was genuine in that respect. I'm sure you've heard this story, he could meet someone 20 years ago and remember their first name and last name and something about them, and it was genuine. He would have made a great politician, and I don't mean in the bad sense like it is today. No, he was inspiring. He was actually, conductor-wise, he was a terrible conductor when it came to, say, during the Neophonic Orchestra. He was terrible at conducting. He did an album of Wagner, which was Largo, like one. And we were doing it at Capitol Records, I used to say to Lenny, how do you follow that? But he could inspire a band just with his presence, just an amazing man. And he just made us work to the full tilt. Yeah, I really had great regard for him, and at the time that I knew him, he was a great leader. He was a democratic man. He was not a racist. He was not he was not bigoted. He was a very broad-minded, open-hearted man. In later years, I hear stories about him that don't agree with that completely. But that was not the man I do. And when you get old, sometimes you revert to strange patterns in your background. They go back to childhood. He'd fallen on his head and so forth. You've heard the story. And he was not mentally. But when I knew him, he was just like a big umbrella to people.
Yes, he carried a heavy weight at North Texas. I think he gave his whole library to the school there, and they archived everything there. And they patterned their bands there after his band with, tin brass and sometimes extra French horns and stuff. And I knew that he was a heavy-duty influence in the whole musical scene.
He was Wagnerian in his approach to music, which was not exactly my cup of tea, but on the other hand, he gave Bill Holman, it's the only arranger that he gave full reign for 2 or 3 years, because Bill was not, he was a jazz writer, and even today with the complex music that he writes, he still never forgets he's writing for a jazz band. But Stan liked the large orchestral thing, and Boy, it was impressive. There's no doubt about that. It wasn't quite as much fun to play, though, as, say, Willis's music.
Because the rhythms kept stopping and starting and having to be conducted and all that kind of stuff? Is that...
It was very hard to follow things.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time I joined the band in Chicago, as I said, I went out on stage to afford to play, and Lee Konitz was still there playing lead alto, and we were playing a Young Blood. It was a Jerry Mulligan tune based on I Got Rhythm, and I went out there and I got completely lost, you know. Just totally lost. I didn't know where I was because I'd never been subjected to such a roar of noise, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It was only years later that I appreciated Stan Levy as one of the best drummers that ever lived. But playing that kind of music, you had to play that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the bass player, Don Bagley, who was an excellent bass player, but he was playing an early electric bass called an Ampeg. And, you know, it hadn't been developed to what it is today.
Are you talking about the electric upright?
Yes, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
It was just awful. You know, they hadn't perfected it today, you know. What can I say? Well, the Fender is an instrument by itself. It's something special, and the electric uprights are not bad. And certainly beats trying to carry a bass to Europe in an airplane.